Has apagado tu micrófono.
Yeah? So,
Yes.
okay, here we go. Normally, I'm from Vermont. Normally, I would introduce my programs as Bonjour mes amis, hello friends, and Kwai Kwai ni doba. Today, I'm going to try to add Spanish. Buenos dos, amigos. I tried. My tongue doesn't work that way. So I am an educator. I've taught for over 40 years. My name is Judy Dow. In the last 10 years, I've become the executive director of a Native organization in New England. I work with Indigenous women on reservations, and we work with their families to reclaim language and music and stories and art and history and land. And a lot of the previous presenters really touched my heart. I was so happy to hear what people were saying. We have in Abenaki language, we have no word for art. I did not know I was an artist until maybe 10 years ago. Somebody introduced me as an artist. Art for us is utilitarian. It's a teaching tool. It's a lesson. And the reason you make what you make is for all of those reasons, to use, to teach, or to learn. And so I've been doing that all my life, and I just found out that it's art. I'm a weaver. I am an ethnobotanist. I've been making and collecting materials for my baskets for over 60 years. I use over 278 plants and a lot of recyclables. There's a train up here that you might enjoy to see later, and I have a little slide up there. It's Trump's Clown Train. A lot of my art as I get older has a political statement to it. Because I come to realize that there's an end to life, right? So if you've got something to say, you should say it now. And historically, art has been the story, and I continue that path. So I would like to, let me tell you first, because we're artists, we sometimes walk to the beat of a different drummer, and that's a good thing. We may make you laugh, we may make you cry. But we don't do anything the same. And because of that, as the moderator, I'm also going to present. So we're breaking the format right from the beginning. And so if I could have the first slide, please. Maybe once the presentation gets up there. Dun, dun. Well, let's see. Maybe I'll pull it up myself. Sure. Oh, here we go. My family was the largest family targeted by the Vermont Eugenic Survey, and 623 people in my family were institutionalized, and many were sterilized over 6 generations. I have first started my art because I was pissed off. But over time, and it was a way for me to reflect my anger, but over time, I began to add humor to it because it seemed so ridiculous what was going on. So this particular tapestry is all the institutions the Abenaki people were placed, mostly because the textbooks of the schools in Vermont were like, there are no Abenaki in Vermont. They only traveled through on their way to Canada. And so I researched the records, who went to all these places, and they were, of course, Abenaki people. The next thing for me that is important is that our stories are hidden. They're hidden in art. They're hidden in weavings, in basketry, in tapestries, on rocks, carved on rocks. And they're so important to history. These are nesting boxes that come from Russia. well, these didn't, I made these, but the technique of, pegging them together come from Russia. And they were used as weapons. They were gifted to most known as the Odawa, and inside the smallest one was smallpox. And so the Europeans gifted these boxes, and because it was an unusual technique, everyone in the village looked at it, everyone explored it, all the elders, the basket makers, and when they got to the last one, they got the smallpox. And so for the historians and the scientists and the social workers here, I really want to stress that these items have stories. They have amazing stories. The next one is the tapestry. In 1921, I had just did some research at UMass, and then COVID started, and I knew that the second annual conference was had happened in 1921, and I was concerned about it. And so I wove my way through the winter. I sewed through the winter, making the original documentation that was on the paperwork. And then I'm like, okay, there's got to be something different. And so I continued to work my way through the winter and into the spring, and I created the witness tree. And the tree was based on Madison Grant's had a program, a eugenicist from that period of time, where he was trying to save the redwood trees. And there was this strong comparison with the redwood trees and the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And so that tree, there's been a lot of discussion about that today. That original tree was actually a redwood. And so what I put on the roots were what I just thought were the opposite. And I was raised with 5 core values. We call them the 5 R's. Responsibility. We have the responsibility to show respect and reverence and, oh God, I knew this would happen. Reciprocity, and relationships. Develop relationships with people. And when you develop a relationship, you understand the other perspective. You understand the other side. And you need to show respect and reverence in doing that. And so I put those values on the roots opposed to what was on the original ones to make a difference. And I shared a picture when I got them done with Charlene, who in turn shared them with Benedict, and that's how they ended up with From Small Beginnings. Also, I take my family history and I tell this story in art. I kind of get sick of just making baskets, so I do a little sculpting now and then. And so in the Vermont Eugenic Survey, they often target children they believe did not have a suitable backyard. So Henry Perkins' backyard, he was the executive director of the Vermont Eugenic Survey, is the big, beautiful green tree with the croquet set and a tricycle. And the other side is my father's backyard. And as you can see, it's utilitarian. And so I made and wove those things to show the two differences and what was considered a suitable backyard to play in. And then along comes Trump. He created the Space Force. And I'm like, oh my God, please. He's ruined the world. Now he's going to ruin the universe. And so I stuck him in a paper mache earth. And the doll is a damn it doll. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but you can buy them online. They're called damn it dolls. And when you get mad, you really damn it, damn it, damn it. And so I kind of attack him a lot in my art. And as you'll see with the train. So his clown train consists of the engine, and then the cabinet is, car is the one where we have the untruthful and the worst cabinet. And then the cargo is all of his executive orders are on blocks. And then the caboose, or is the doghouse, where people go who don't follow what he wants them to do. I also believe that education is key. Like I said, I've been teaching for over 40 years. I still do a lot of teaching if you're teachers out here, imagine this. I have between 5,000 and 6,000 students a year in the studies that I do. And what I find most difficult is that people, like scholars, like you folks, will make textbooks for college. But with all of this stuff like sex ed happening in 4th and 5th and 6th and 7th, we need to teach this at that age. And I do teach it at this age, but there's very little literature out there. So we create our own books. I divide the class into who, what, where, when, why. I point them in the direction for research. They do the research on the Vermont Eugenic Survey. They come back and report to the class. They put it together and make a class book, which is also up here you can look at. And they keep it in the class, and the following year, another class adds to it. So they now have resources in their classroom. And if any of you scholars are thinking of writing for that age group, that would be awesome, because we can use some resources. And then the last thing I want to show you is this little bottle. And you know the story of a note in a bottle and a message in a bottle? Well, I've woven the bottle to look like the flag, and I put a note in it. It says SOS, save our ship. And every place I go, I leave one. So my art, keep going, there you go. And so my art is pretty political at times, but it's always educational. And I'm very happy to find out that it's art. So I would like to introduce, thank you. So I think we've talked about, what? I can't see. We talked about Richard couldn't be here with us today, but he's very much part of us because he's very huge on the wall behind us. And so we talked about, let's see, Richard will go first. And we have some bios, but the ladies are like, that's too long, don't read that. And so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about every one of them, and they can add their story with their art. So Richard was raised by an anti-colonialist Chinese father and a culturally affirming Mexicana mother. The formative aspects of Lou's life was crossing the Mexican-U.S. border daily and working with his family at the National City Swap Meet. As a Chicano artist, he has consistently explored stories about his family and his racism. Lou served 29 years in the department of chair at the Institutions for Higher Education, curating, organizing, and 50 exhibitions. Had over 150 exhibitions nationally and internationally, and his work has been cited in over 40 scholarly books. His biography is included in the Smithsonian Archives at the American Art. Thank you, Richard. We can't wait to hear from you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, Judy, and thank you for sharing your powerful work. Thank you to the organizers of this amazing conference and for inviting me. It's a great honor. And let me just go ahead and pull up my slides. Okay, there we go. Okay. So as Judy mentioned, I grew up on the U.S.-Mexican border and lived in Tijuana in La Colonia Roma. And then my father would cross and work in the United States as a butcher. And he would take my sister Linda and I to school every day until we moved to the United States when I was around 8 or 9. But that was very formative because of being questioned every day about my identity. It really formed my worldview in regards to my place in the United States. One of the first works that I'll share with you is called The Border Door. And it's a door that I placed on the U.S.-Mexican border. There's a quarter-mile east of the Rodriguez International Airport in Tijuana. And so this is 1988, so the border looks very, very different now. But you can see me as a young man walking and placing the door, and it was a freestanding workable door with 134 keys facing Mexico. And then from there, I went to the neighborhood where I grew up, La Colonia Roma, and then walked to the next neighborhood, La Colonia Altamira, and I handed out over 250 keys to the people that I would encounter. And I was very interested in placing objects in public spaces and seeing how those objects would interact with that space that has history, and the object has history, and where the objects and the site would have a conversation, and it would transform. The object would transform itself because of the history, the context of the history of that site. So we could see that object in a different kind of way. The border door didn't last too long. I believe the Border Patrol destroyed it because 2 days later it went back. And this is the nature of public work. I didn't ask permission. I'm not going to ask permission of the Border Patrol to introduce objects into the border. And so I went back 2 days later, and the door was in splinters and completely destroyed, which is fine too. So this is the border door, and you can see me handing out keys to people that I encounter. The next piece I'm going to show you is I was a member of this group, this collective called the Border Art Workshop, Taller de Arte Fronterizo. And I joined the group in 1988, actually shortly after the border door. We wrote and directed this project called Border Sutures, Puntadas Fronterizas, and executed in 1990. And so what we did was we drove across the United States and then zigzagged our way, crossing into Mexico, exiting Mexico, crossing back into the United States, into Mexico, back to the United States, weaving back and forth. And along the way, we had fabricated prior to our departure steel staples. And this was based on Gloria Anzaldua's work about how she talks about la herida abierta, and the wound that exists between the United States and Mexico. So this was an act of healing for us, an act of contemplation, an act of meditation, an act of calling forth, right? The power dynamics, the injustices that occurs on the border. And now that we see with what President Trump is doing, the border is everywhere, where these acts of violence can happen anywhere. And so this is us at the mouth of the river near Matamoros, and we're blessing the steel staple. And you see this with sledgehammers and shovels, etc. And we're about to staple our two countries back together again. So there you could see I'm on the far right, and Michael Schnorr is next to me, then Victor Ochoa, Robert Sanchez, and Eva Sandoval. And the person taking the photograph is Lourdes Grobet, the Mexican photographer. This is in Laredo. So we would, as you know, most of the border is a river, and so we would make boxes. Or in this instance, we made a box and we put the steel staple inside, and we invited Berta Cotar and I. We were on radio in Nuevo Laredo and invited the community to come out and participate as a community act of healing. So people would bring letters and put them inside our box, or would write on the box, or would draw on our box, or paint on our box, etc. And so then all together we would float the box down the river. And then another one of our performances was called Border Tug of War. We had made masks with the Mexican flag on one side and the American flag on the other. And then we made migra masks. And then this is in El Paso and in the park. And so then we would play the tug of war on the border, and then we would be reciting text as this would occur. And here's that you could see on the very bottom in that ring that we created, one of the staples. And so we would pull down the fence, and then we would put the staple to pull down the barbed wire. And you could see Carmela Castrejon, Berta Jotar, myself, and Robert Sanchez, and we're exchanging plants from both sides of the border and planting them. And now this is towards the end of our trip. And so whenever we would install these steel staples, these steel sutures, we would invite the community if they were there, or we would invite the community via radio or through flyers. And we would have people stamping their names on the steel staple. And these steel staples would be anywhere from 2 feet to 6 feet long, a 1/4-inch steel and about 4 inches wide. And then we would invite people to use the hammer to collectively suture our two countries back together again. This other project that is the first project that I did about the Confederacy in the United States. And so myself and a friend of mine, Robert Spencer, who's an artist, we did this performance in Clemson, South Carolina. And Clemson University is the school that I went to and where I met Robert Spencer. We were both graduate students. And so in 1992, I fly back to Clemson to work with graduate students. But I wanted to do a piece in the gallery with my friend. And so we collaborated and worked on this project called Slave Sticks. And Clemson University is the site of the John C. Calhoun Mansion, who was our 7th president and was an active segregationist, slave owner, slave trader, and was a father of the Southern nationalism and a proponent of secessionism. And so Robert Spencer and I recreated the cemetery, the segregated cemetery that existed in Clemson. And he also, because he comes from generations of enslaved people, his grandfather told him where a slave cemetery was. And so we went there and gathered sticks as metaphor for bones of the enslaved. And so we recreated the cemetery in the gallery. And then when we started the performance, we did a series of rituals and then wrote text on the wall and then led a pilgrimage to the John C. Calhoun Mansion with the sticks between us. And then we placed the sticks at each door and at each window as a reminder of our true history and not the whitewashed history of enslaved peoples in the United States. And then upon our return to the gallery, then we had another sort of cleansing ritual to end performance. The Whiteifying Project, or Los Antropolocos Project, is a project that Robert Sanchez and I collaborated on for a number of years. And it was a fictionalized account. So really, we were kind of using Jonathan Swift and his modest proposal as a model. And so we wrote this whole fictional history about two Chicano anthropologists in the future where white people were extinct. And we discover, as anthropologists, we would have dig sites and other sorts of anthropological studies. And so we believe that the white race was extinct at that time, but we received information that it wasn't extinct. And so we went on a safari hunt to capture white people. And so here we are with our tools of the trade. And there's our graduate team at a dig site. And we're unearthing objects from white culture and examining and ascribing meaning to them. And these are white mummies that we found and that there are in our university now. So all of this is a parody, right? All this is satire. And what we did was we examined, 19th century Victorian behavior of examining the other and very specifically the Venus Hottentot or Sarah Bartman and Sarah Bartman. And so we were very interested in how during the Victorian era where they would have recreate villages, etc., as a way of othering people and a way of categorizing people in the sort of pseudoscientific way as subhuman or less than human. And so we were just basically in reverse exhibiting the same kind of methods and under the guise of science. And so here we are now. We believe that there's white people in existence, and we are looking for them. And then Dr. Sanchez is laying out a trap for them because our theories concluded that white people love country western music and donuts. And so Dr. Sanchez here is putting out a recording of western music, country western music, to lure them out. And so here they are, the first time we've ever seen white people in the wild. They are lured by our country western music and the donuts. And then Dr. Sanchez and I start chasing them to try to capture them. And in the front is Dr. Sanchez with his ninja tranquilizing bow. And I have a net. And there they are rounding the corner until we finally capture them and then put them on display, and then we put them on tour around the world. So you can see, as you can see, we're using the same kind of approaches, but using humor. So we could lance the bubble and see how dehumanizing this practice was in order to support white supremacy. This is a piece that I did in Memphis. It's called Recovering Memphis, where I created a series of boxes, and then we would stack these boxes. So while that was occurring, while we were stacking these boxes, my daughter Gloria and her friend John would sing spirituals as people would stack boxes. And in the background is the equestrian statue of General Forrest, who started the Ku Klux Klan after the Civil War. And he was a slave trader, a slave owner, but there was a huge statue of him and a park named after him, but now that's been removed, thank goodness. But during this performance, we would stack We stacked these boxes in front, and so you could no longer see the statue. And so now there was this other image. First image was fire, and then I invited 6 people to come and tell their stories. So I was interested in creating counter images and then counter narratives and counter definitions for the park. And so this performance lasted an hour. And so then Robert Bain would tell his story, and then they would dismantle. So when the boxes were going up, they would be singing, and when they were to be dismantled, it would be in silence. And so the boxes, as you know, had 6 sides. So we would dismantle and then turn the box to produce another image. So there they are dismantling, and then we would reconstitute the boxes, and there would be another image. And so this is the history of the Mississippi River abstracted. Then another person would come and tell their stories. In this case, Elaine Blanchard, the storyteller. And then we would tear those boxes down and then reconstitute them while spirituals are being sung. And then another image would appear, and then another storyteller. So this went on, 6 images, 6 storytellers, until the very last one was a photograph of what the park would look like without the equestrian statue of the founder of the Ku Klux Klan in the middle of our park, in the middle of our city, in the middle of a city that is an authentic Black city, 65% African Americans. And so then the last speaker was a friend of mine. Well, they're all friends of mine. Agustin Diaz, who was also a Aztec dancer in Memphis, Tennessee. And so then he told his story, and then he danced around the park. And that was the end of that performance. Next piece is really about stories about my family. And a lot of the work that I do revolves around stories. The Border Door was based on a story about the struggle of grandparents coming to the United States to visit us, or of my former wife struggle as an undocumented worker in the United States. And so all the work that I do has a story behind it. There's some kind of compelling story that impels the work into some kind of to manifest itself. So this is an installation, an immersive installation that I was working on for about 6, 7 years. And so when you would walk through this space, you would see all these columns, and these columns are covered in hojas de tamales, tamale leaves, and they would have digital prints, digital illustration prints of my family, or pan dulce, nopales, etc. And some of them would have text. And so it was like a ceremonial space, a space where we shared stories. But as you were walking through here, and these columns are lit from inside, as you can see, you would hear stories, because there would be speakers inside some of the columns. And while you're walking through the space, you would hear stories told by my children about our family. And so, and then this is my father's chair that was remade by an artist friend of mine, Cher Durham. And so she recreated or refurbished my father's recliner. And you could see me elevating it. And there's my father and my mother in the background. My father was Chinese, my mother was Mexicana. And so there's images of my mom and my father and my children on this chair. And then there's my uncle. And so lots of family. And I was thinking that this would be a ceremonial space, post and lintel, where other people could bring their stories as well. And this is the last piece I'll share with you. It's called Embustero. It's what I'm working on now. It's a graphic novel about these stories about my family. And a number of people are working on it. There's 10 stories, and 10 artists are working on these stories. And so here are some of the drawings. That last one was Lisa Williamson. And then also, these are laser engraved plywood panels of the images and the stories. And there's a video as well of the animated stories. And there's one of the images, this was sort of a prototype of the images for the graphic novel. But that's like one of the plywood, pieces of plywood that's been laser engraved. And more images by Lisa, detail of the panel. And then here I would hope to see if possible. Yeah. These are robots that tell stories. So my son Ming, who's an electrical computer engineer, he fabricated these robots. And so, and on one side, there's a robot that goes back and forth and it projects the text like a typewriter. And it's a text of the story that I wrote. And then this robot would go around the room telling stories. So I was imagining that people could walk with that robot and they could hear the stories, like, oops, and similar to walking with people and stories being told. The last story I'm going to talk about is this about my father, and making sure I have enough time. I have enough time for this story. Okay, so this is the drawings by Robert Spencer, who you saw previous in the slave stick. So he's working with me now on this particular story. And so that's me facing my father. And Robert Spencer decided to draw my son as my father. And so that my father's telling me this story. The story is about him being in World War II. He was, as I mentioned before, Chinese, one of the few Chinese, ethnic Chinese to fight in World War II. There were about 3,000. And this was during the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. And so this story is about him. He was a butcher, and him kind of bantering with his friend, Gary. And Gary would talk about, the United States could wipe out China anytime it wants. And then there would be this friendly banter. And so my father remembers him coming back on furlough from World War II, back home to Coahoma, Mississippi. He was part of the Delta Chinese, the Mississippi Delta. And so I'll read this part of the story. So my father was on a troop train on furlough from the war, wearing his Marine dress blues, going home to the Mississippi Delta. The northbound train from New Orleans was cutting a narrow path through the southern woods on his way to Coahoma. He watched thousands of acres of pines, tall oaks, dogwoods, and black gum trees pass by the train window, all filled with tender green leaves, rejoicing in the spring air. Each train car was also filled with his fellow African-American soldiers wearing their neatly pressed Army summer service uniforms, also returning from the war, their memories filled with the fog of combat and longing to return home to their loved ones. So what happens in this story is that the train is approaching a small town in the south, north of New Orleans. And in the train, there's a welcoming committee, and the train platform, the train station, has all these tables set up with coffee and donuts, and everyone in that small town is excited because they know their soldiers are coming home. Their soldiers on their way to either come there or on their way home from the war, from World War II, on furlough. And so, as I said, there's donuts and everyone's dressed up nice, etc., ready to welcome them. But when the all-white welcoming committee and all-white town sees that it's black soldiers and my father, this Chinese soldier, they start to overturn the tables filled with coffee and donuts in disgust, and they leaving the platform with donuts and coffee spilled all over because of the racist attitudes that they had, regardless that these people were fighting for all of our freedoms. So I wanted to share that story as I end my presentation. It's my father's story. It's our story. So he fought during World War II, during the time of the Chinese Exclusion Act, as I mentioned before. And he fought in the battles of Guadalcanal and Tarawa, which are some of the bloodiest battles in the Pacific Theater. And he fought there, fighting for freedoms that he was excluded from because of the Chinese Exclusion Act. But he believed in the aspiration, the democratic experiment that we're living in, and that he believed in the qualities of the grand democratic experiment with great hope. Thank you so much.
Richard, that was really awesome. Thank you for sharing the untold stories. I'm so happy that you stressed that they were untold. There's so many out there that need to be shared. Thank you. I know you cannot see the people here, but they were like mesmerized by your stories. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So next we have Liz. And believe it or not, I have no word for time either. In my language, I don't have a clock up here. So Liz is helping me with time. Let me see. Liz, okay, let me just do one sentence. Liz has reduced her bio to one sentence and she will do the rest. She is a British artist, photographer, and anthropologist whose work bridges visual arts and academic research. She's born in Birmingham, UK, and she's ready to go.
This project will explain a bit about me anyway. Do you want to put it full here? Yeah. Is that, I've got two mics for me. That might be a bit more overwhelming. Is that good? Does that sound all right? Closer? Here we go. Is that on? Yeah. Is that better? Hello? Good, okay. So I'm very delighted to be here today and in wonder at this panel. To be together is really exciting in this extraordinary city that I fell in love with on the first day. And I'm going to be sharing one project which has become really the focus of my work since 2017. And I want to emphasize the plus sign after my name because this project grows and moves through collaboration, and hundreds of people have contributed to the project's multi-sensory archive through individual creation and collective imagination in workshops mainly, and the friendships and relationships that are developed from that. The SIM project seeks to create spaces of openness, visibility, and storytelling that foreground creative resilience and experiences of displacement, and emphasize compassion and learning as cherished values that resist deep-seated racism and discrimination. As Elif Shafak eloquently puts it, stories matter. Knowing each other's stories brings us closer, while silences, especially entrenched silences, only keep us apart. And this is the 9th country where the SIM project workshops have taken place, and you guys will be part of that workshop tomorrow, I hope. So please come back. I've been testing the chemicals already in my hotel room and everything's ready to go. The project's also part of my practice-based doctoral project, thankfully funded by the Leverhulme Trust. Thank you very much. And at the core of my research lies the argument that personal smartphones act as counter-imperial archives and radical sites of solidarity and friendship. As intimate, mobile, and participatory media forms, they produce visual and sonic knowledge through which people negotiate space and reimagine belonging. So I'm going to give you a fast-forward tour through the project story and showing how we got to where we are and introducing the people who've inspired it along the way. So if we just move, sorry, I can't click the slides myself, so here we go. I'll just wave to click. So I'm going to whiz you back to 2017 and this collection of keys, which this photograph can't do justice to. This is a chronology of a city in the UK, Coventry, from the 11th century, that rod on the left side, to about 1920s, kind of as close as the archivist could work out. And I encountered this set of keys and passed them around with a group of Syrians who'd recently arrived on a resettlement program, a UN resettlement program in Coventry. And I'd been invited as an artist who grew up nearby to Coventry to do a project about the city. At that time, it was the fastest growing city in the UK. Partly because of a growing student population, but also because it's a city of sanctuary, one of the first cities that pledged to be a city of sanctuary. And at that time, they'd welcome more Syrians on UN resettlement programs than any other city in the UK. And I thought that was an important story to highlight. And so I met people in their English language classes and invited them to the museum to see the ways that people's stories who've contributed to the city have been remembered through objects and images, and to see if there was maybe something that we might encounter together that might spark interest and inspiration to create something to add, so people could add to their own, to the archive, something about their experiences in their city and their imagination of what their future might be like there. So if we could just move to the next slide. And it was speaking about these keys and talking about what was most important and people received when they first arrived and setting up home, that it led to talking about the SIM card really being the key to contemporary life in a new place. As Kasim put it, a person in any country begins their relationship, adventures, and acquires an identity, temporary or long, when they put the SIM card of that country in their phone. And as Abdul said to me, that my smartphone is my suitcase. That was the only thing that was important to me to bring with me and my family. So we were inspired by the smartphone SIM card as a symbol of global internet, intimate connectivity, yet also acknowledging that it's essentially an ID card in a new place and used for migration surveillance and border enforcement. So it has this tension of something which allows sort of freedom beyond borders, but also with that flip side. Do you want to move to the next slide, please? So to value the role of the SIM card, we created these silver and gold, like nano SIM size, really tiny pieces, artifacts, to add to the key collection. And they were designed, the illustrations, by people who took part in the project. It's quite a short project. And so people were invited, but they had to be very, very simple designs because these are tiny, and this is photographed with a macro lens. So you see scratches that you wouldn't be able to see with a naked eye on these. And then on the back side, you'll see the people chose a personal number for them where you would normally have that international identification code. We'll just go to the next slide. And this was Fadi's, and he spoke about scissors being like music to him, and he was a hairdresser in Syria and him wanting to use his scissors in Coventry. So after this short project, the keys were exhibited with the Sims, and there was an opening, and they were added to the collection. And I didn't really know, when everybody also received one of these tiny things, if people were really going to think what a silly trinket or what value it really might have for people. And the jeweler who'd helped us make them was there, and everybody went up to him spontaneously and asked if they could be made independent. So I found that quite powerful and leading in thinking about what people want to wear around intimately around their neck and carry and keep, and that symbolism all around the world of what we want to wear against our skin, something small and precious. So that sort of led to more and more thinking. And everybody asked if they could have their portrait taken wearing it, which had not been the plan of the project, but it's a big honor to be asked to make a portrait with somebody in a studio setting. If you just want to move to the next slide. Yeah, this is Fadi, sorry, the colors aren't exact on this screen, but you get an idea. And so we did this quite classical studio portraiture. Would it help to put the other light off? Someone's suggesting? I don't know. Okay. Don't fall asleep. So yeah, so we made these portraits, and in that sort of sacred space almost of the portrait studio, it's a very intimate encounter, and I always feel with the project that's really when I meet people, because really, I just set the camera up. Everybody knows the scene, and I just press the button and people position themselves. And I always find those, how people imagine to position themselves and the gestures that come out from that, very powerful. And everybody asked if they could have these pictures digitally to share with loved ones on WhatsApp. So that really led to the next stage of thinking around the project as the importance of the images that we create and we keep on our phones, and these personal archives that we're creating, and how we map our lives with them, how important they are, and how could we value that, and how is that potential maybe to democratize the ways that we remember and record stories. So all these ideas in the head, thanks to King's College London for a 2-year residency in the Digital Humanities Department, gave me the capacity to really sort of test ideas. And should we go to the next slide? I think there's one more picture. Yeah, and the next one, please. So I'll talk about now how the projects have developed, the workshops are developed. So I started speaking to people much more about SIM cards, and I got really hooked on SIM cards, the idea, and found that many people have collections of SIM cards. People keep them in their wallets to places they may not be able to go back to. And everybody seems to have a story of a SIM card or a moment that the idea of the SIM card kind of unlocked a lot of stories for people. So in the workshops, which are generally around 7 to 10 people, it varies where they go, but that's kind of the magic number of keeping it intimate, but also people can have a collective, but also an individual experience. There isn't a sort of pressure to share in that number. And generally they're for people who have experienced displacement's affected their lives, and people that they're living alongside and may not otherwise meet. And people are invited, first of all, to add to a map, which we will do tomorrow. To draw the places, threads out to the places in the world that they most connect to through their smartphone outside of the country that we're in. And then they're invited to choose one image. This is the hard part, that gives them a sense of belonging from that ocean of images on the phone to create into a piece. If you just want to go to the next slide. These are just some examples of pictures that they've chosen. I also invite people to choose a screenshot, because the screenshot shows some of that exchange that one has through devices. So the time, the date, whether it's like the carrier, so how our relationships are kind of filtered through these systems, but also how we navigate them, how we archive within them. Each one has a story of its own. Won't go into them all, but on the left is a call between 4 family members in 4 different countries, and on the right it's a lady, Farazan, when she arrived, and she left Afghanistan. She was a judge in Afghanistan, and she fled with her family, and when she arrived to Greece, that was the first place that she felt of safety, and she'd carried in her notebook that she'd picked up from Kabul airport this flower and opened it out at the Acropolis. And you can see there's Acropolis there of Athens. If we go to the next slide, please. So there's been a lot of experimentation to get to this point where we are now, and you'll see the funky kit tomorrow. The idea was to bring in the images, thinking about how important it is, the images that we are exchanging into the artwork. But that took a lot of testing and rewinding back through different histories of photography, and looking at different processes. Really, part of the reason is because I think the craft of photography, I was very frustrated training in photography, and that the beauty of the darkroom and the crafting of an image, I feel like that's something that I missed. So essentially it's sort of trying to bring that back through an analog process, through the analog, and combining it with the digital to make unique pieces. So I call this the shrinker. So if anyone's been in a darkroom, you may know an enlarger. This kind of does the opposite. You'll see it tomorrow. There's you put the phone at the bottom, and then there's a lens in the middle. This is it kind of unpacked on the left. And people are invited to basically photograph onto 4 pieces of glass, their image. These pieces of glass are coated with a light-sensitive emulsion. And these glass are SIM card size. If we go to the next, please. And then we have a darkroom, just to show you how it's developed. This is Frank, my collaborator's trousers in the initial darkroom in 2020, and now we have the SimPod 3D printed. And tomorrow you will see the very latest one, which is even snazzier. The whole process is also developed through exchange with people in workshops and trying to make it as accessible as possible. So you can really see step by step how the piece is being made, and you learn a bit about photography history in the process. And the idea is that I can show someone how to use it and then they can teach the next person. So it becomes quite a collaborative process. If you want to move to the next slide. And here's an example on a good day of how they might come out. They don't always work because that's the magic of the process, and the climates in different places do all sorts of interesting things with the emulsion, and that's kind of the magic. There's a little red light in the darkroom so you can actually look through a holder and see the image developing. And then you lift the lid and you never quite know what you're going to get. But everybody's photographed it themselves, so they created it. Do you want to move to the next slide? So I guess in terms of the history of eugenics, sort of the process confronts the role of photography as a tool for racist and classist ideologies and its evolution into algorithmic biases in contemporary AI imagery through these creation of these unique, sort of perfectly imperfect artworks that illuminate the beauty and meaning of our individuality and nourish our connections. So each person creates one to keep, to carry and take away with them, and that's the key element of the project, of the workshop. And they're also invited to add one to the collection if they would like, and so far everybody has, which is amazing. If we move to the next slide. Yeah. So I've also learned a lot about jewelry in this process, and metal. And so now we have this model, sim scale model. This is like the 7th edition of this model to try to get it right. So there's a backplate where people are invited to stamp with a hammer, and you can do it tomorrow, your own number on a backplate, which slides in with the glass to hold and protect the piece. So it's an archival piece. If you want to move to the next slide. So the project continues to evolve in dialogue with archives, and particularly with the focusing on working with young people and creating exchanges with young people in different places. And in a recent workshop at the National Portrait Gallery in London, we explored the collection of miniature paintings and photographs and the ways that technology has changed how and who is represented and remembered. We were inspired by the role of early magic lantern projections. And so we enlarged the dried glass prints using an old analog projector onto a Perspex window. So everyone was invited to draw over their image, so what they were drawn to. They only had 30 seconds to do it. And the analog projector enlarged these kind of the unique physical imperfections created on the contours of the hand-painted emulsion on the glass, and the kind of the glitches that blurred the digital filters of the image. And the projection created a sort of ephemeral presence, mirroring the ways that digital images are shared and consumed and then vanish deep in our archives as we flick through them. It was a kind of the whole process is sort of totally ridiculous, what we're doing, and it painstakingly goes wrong all the time, and with the projector kept overheating, but there was so much humor in the process, and I think that's a really important element, that it sort of cuts through some of the roles that everybody also comes into in a room. And there was a lot of laughter going on. So after everybody drew over their images, if we go to the next slide, you can see the result. This was our collective portrait of 8 people's drawings. And we decided that we would now try to make that into a copper mobile. If you just go to the next slide, this is just showing you another way that the archive has been shown, constantly shown in different ways, sometimes enlarged, and this is a collection of 1,000 pieces. We move to the next slide. That's my last. So as well as a collective archive, I also seek to record and amplify overlooked grassroots movements that resist hostile state policies, particularly in terms of migration policies, and the fear and racism in societies through creative acts of care, and focus on the connections that hold us together, and not only with our human beings, but also with nature. So this glittering silver shawl is inspired by the spirit and the story of the Portland Global Friendship Group and the international trade of limestone from the Isle of Portland in Dorset. The whole little island has been chiseled at the sides around, nibbled away by heavy quarrying and extraction to build some of the most powerful buildings in the world. So in New York, UN buildings built with Portland stone, and the Buckingham Palace in London. So this tiny island has really contributed a lot to the world, but been quite overlooked and hasn't received any of that wealth. And the Portland Global Friendship Group was founded by a small group of women around a kitchen table, and they formed in response to the fear and hostility surrounding the arrival of the BB Stockholm barge, which was a designated temporary accommodation for hundreds of men within the asylum system over 18 months. And the pendants that you see here are knotted together with silver thread. That took a really long time. And are connected by a central core of the Portland limestone, hold glass prints of mobile phone photographs that people had taken, the men and the islanders, of the shared moments that they had together, of different activities, the views, the hugs, and the laughter. And this shape of it was inspired by so many of the pictures that people shared, being of hugs, that I wanted to create something which felt a bit like an embrace. And the silver frames, the 30 silver frames, reflect the 300 suitcases collected by locals, ensuring that the men could leave and could carry their belongings with dignity as they left the barge for accommodation around the UK when it closed. We just go to the next slide, the last one. You can just press play and hopefully it should work. So I shared with you at the beginning how the mapping process, and people are invited to draw out threads. So I've now digitized that, and on the website, which is an important element of the project, and increasingly trying to make it more interactive, you'll see these individual threads, lines which have been drawn by people in the workshop. So everyone is calculated anonymously. And I'm going to add and make one map from the workshop of us that we'll do tomorrow. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Liz. What a great way to develop relationships. Awesome. Thanks. So next we have Lucía Cuba. And her bio is.
Oh well, I have like something that I can say. No worries about that, and go for it.
Okay.
Thank you.
You don't even want me to say the first sentence?
I
Okay, go for it.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry, like I don't mean to cut you off, but so first, thank you. I am going to speak in Spanish, my native language. So for those of you who might want to translate, please put those on. Vamos, sí. And de nuevo para las facilitadoras de traducción,
Once
por
again,
favor.
for the interpreters, if I speak very fast, just please make some type of signal to me to know that I'm doing that. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start reading. So what I have in the slides is not a literal translation of what I'm saying in Spanish, but these are slides in English, and I'm going to be having a dialogue in both universe because for 15 years I have been living in an English-speaking country, so I'm going to just focus on reading my notes, and just very quickly we're going to go through the slides. So good afternoon once again. Thank you so much for the invitation to open this space, and we're going to stay here for a little bit. I would just like to thank once again the organizers and those that are participating in this encounter as well. Before I talk about the projects, I would just like to make a small observation. If we can go to the next slide. My presentation today is not fully complete. My computer is having a neutral computer, which is the one that doesn't generate friction when I go through borders. And on the other hand, I also forgot a few things. A shirt that had the word vagina as part of one of my projects, genitalia, that is wearable for a prison. But that performance didn't actually work. If we could go back, please. One before. There we go. Thank you. So I'm mentioning this not just as an anecdote, but also as a reminder that even decisions that are seemingly small, that we show that we hide what is readable or what is acceptable in certain spaces, are part of broader structures of controlled normalization and power, just as garments. And so from there, I want to share a selection of projects that are in the intersection between design, art, education, and social justice. I'm interested in thinking about design not just as a production of objects, but also as a situated practice that is also political. I come from Lima, Peru. Since 2010, I live and I work in New York. I am a professor in Parsons, which is a fashion design school in the New School University. My formation actually is in social psychology and public health. That path has deeply marked my creative career. It has led me to research how the policies of the body are built, how the knowledge is also produced in terms of health, and what is the design, the roles design in those processes. So these come from a lot of my questions that I ask myself. Some of them are open questions. For example, how health is communicated today and to whom or for whom. If we can move 2 slides, how citizenship can recover agency over their own bodies. Another slide, please. Another one. I have a lot of slides, my apologies. So I repeat my 3 questions. How is health communicated today and for whom? How can the citizenship recover agency over their own bodies? Can wearables become critical infrastructure of communication and political action? So the previous thing that you saw was pretty much just a mapping of different projects that I work on. It is true that not all of them deal or address these topics, but they tend to be circulating as open processes that use garments or wearables in different types of spaces, both public and private. What you will be seeing now is a path, visual path, that goes through some of those explorations. So Article 6, gender narratives. This is a research project based on the practice that is using some wearable aspects as memory and collective dialogue. The next one, please. Next one, please. So the project is activated between the public and private space, understanding the body as a political territory. From the design, I work with materials, patterns, and techniques to generate what I suggest as impact from the sensitivity, critical reflection, and aesthetics. Yes, thank you. From fashion, I try to reappropriate some formats such as runways, collections, pictures, so that I can move the traditional uses of those and instead include something that we could treat as public pedagogy. One of the core centers or axes of the project is to promote conversations that talk about consent and information access to healthcare that are understood as aesthetics practices linked to autonomy, agency, and rights, mostly sex and reproductive rights. Article 6 is trying to see how the power relations can determine which bodies are protected and which ones are left in vulnerable situations. This project, Article 6, the Article 6 project takes forced sterilization as a core. This happened in Peru. I think it's 1997. I don't really remember the exact date, but I think those are the years. And it started from a research project that started actually in 2008 while I was doing some studies for public health. So I went back to the analysis of this case a few years later from the design perspective, trying to find and to understand how a system, the fashion one in this case, doesn't tend to be, or well, actually tends to be one of the most violent systems on which a lot of the conversations are perpetuated, many of which we have had in the last few days. So how can a fashion system gather some universal elements and provides them to people, and how that could have content that could promote memory, that could one way or another incentivize conversations that can be interpreted in the bodies themselves. I'm going to show some other images. The next one, please. So this project has been developing for it's actually going to be over 12 years, and we have had many activations and different formats. I'm going to also talk about some other projects, so I'm not going to dig very deep in this. Next one, please. But this project also took as well a few years and a dimension that went beyond the case study of forced sterilizations in Peru. The intention was to have a symbolic discussion from the use of thread and the body. So 3 conversations regarding women that had been sterilized in China, in the United States, and in Peru, this without their consent. And I use resources. This happens through different projects, not just with Article 6, with different forums as well, like galleries, exhibitions, installations. Next one, please. And also the ones that I already mentioned, pictures, photography, editorials, runways, fashion runways, and also objects that usually are lent and are activated in the people that wear them, and one way or another they go back to a matrix. The next one, please. Here we have some pictures of one same group of garments that is being activated in different bodies in different spaces with different stories. So each one re-signified, and it generates a series of other types of conversations that are generated from these activations. Next one, please. This is a visual map of different ways of activation. Sorry, because the chronology is not exact, but it's around 2012 through 2026. These are some of the ways in which the project is still activated. Next one, please. Next one. Another space where the project can be located goes from what is academic or not academic, publications, conferences, processes that reinterpret the work and also its meaning, which still allows me to think about the possibilities and the resources that in this case, what is wearable can have many. Next one, please. This is a chronology from 2012, for example, through 2026. Maybe if I have enough time, maybe I could make some type of reflection in terms of how wearable objects in fashion tend to always be measured from a temporality, and that has absolutely nothing to do with temporality, but it seems to still be relevant depending on the outfit that can still produce some type of meaning that could be reinterpreted depending on how that is situated. Next one. Next one. So a little from that experience, some other projects came up. And the next one, please. And the intention is to also use some other spaces where we can think and reflect on health. This is how exercises in health, or ejercicios en salud, is another project that proposes health as a private aspect, and most of the times it's more conceptual than others. The next one, please. So this project gets rid of healthcare outside of the exclusively institutional arena, and instead it is situated in daily life spaces, or not daily as well, activating reflection processes as well as agency and care. So this project is trying to talk about health topics. In this case, we used a process, documentation process of people with the testimonies that had some diagnosis of cancer. That was a link between the color and the meaning in the reading or the lecture of the illness. Also, we worked on some garments that in some cases can be more symbolic depending on the weight of the fabric, the use of color, the graphic aesthetics that also can be used in the places where this is activated. Within this project as well, I don't know if it didn't work. Maybe next one? Oh, that's weird. I thought there was another one. Well, anyway, next one, please. Okay, there. So genitalia, this has to do with, well, they moved the description, but this is a series of wearable garments that uses commercial language to question cultural imaginaries in terms of sexuality and body, generating dialogue spaces from the provocation visually and symbolically. So we worked with 4 graphic impressions, 2 text in Spanish, 1 that said penis, and the other one with the word vagina. These were in series and with symbolic elements. I work a lot with graphic design and also with very literal text. Here, there is a game of provocation, thinking about objects that could be worn on very specific situations, for example, Thanksgiving, Christmas, or moments where maybe one way or another you want to try to provoke without necessarily explicitly saying anything. I also like the idea of working, just as in Article 6, the graph that is in a series that is not just the impression as a slogan, and one way or another forces you to find a very small anecdote. I was actually seeing the picture of the march and in a demonstration, and actually I was in the subway. I had the T-shirt that said vagina everywhere, and so you almost need to rest a little bit to see what it said. And I don't know, I was probably almost sleeping, but I heard that somebody behind me said, navigate, 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 and then there is a pause, and then she was like, vagina. And so this was like an aha moment, and it was an opportunity for me to think like, yes, exactly, that is what I want you to know that it said. And it was just right there. It was not like it was hidden or anything. Anyway, next one, please. Under the same technical resources, I'm not here necessarily talking about anything else. And so in this specific project, we are also talking about the need to work with accessible resources for everyone, for all of those people that think that we don't have a link or a relation to what we are wearing, that we need to know how to design or know about fashion, and I say this in quotes, to be able to appropriate or own what we are wearing. And so this is how Wearables for or to Protest is born. This is a project that tries to transform collective or personal experiences in wearable projects or aspects or objects that can be used politically. This is activated through workshops, installations, and public actions. using the body of people that sometimes they can wear these wearables as spaces for visibilization and protest. Many of these pieces are my own personal reflection from an employer asking me what did I do with the money that I made after having taken carrots and hummus to an event, and I said that I could only use the money to pay for somebody to take care of my child. And also wearables for or to protest is activated in spaces like this with diverse audiences like children. That has generated a new dimension of the type of projects that now I'm working on currently. And it has really helped me to think about how little accessible technical resources tend to be so that you can own what you are wearing, and also how far away they are also just as health content from people daily. How many of us actually know how to make some adjustments in our own clothes? How many of us know how to do that? Or maybe we think that this belongs somewhere else. How many of us suddenly probably have never been exposed to some of these practices? So, I mean, these are questions that I'm still asking myself. Next one. This project, 35 wearables. I'm struggling with how to say the title in Spanish, but for unaccompanied American dolls. This is a project that actually started in 2019 as a direct response to the migration policy in the United States, and this is through a doll, a wearable doll. I also work with what we call soft sculptures, and the garments actually include real testimonies that have been extracted from journal publications, journalism publications. This is a work that is questioning the dominating narratives in talking about pertinence or belonging. And so it makes a reference to building or the construction directly to the American doll that one way or another is translating the American identity that I am questioning in this project. And so we generate these wearables of that same size, let's say a doll size, so it's 100% functional, and so they have or collect some of these extractions. There were some journalistic articles that made relation to and talked about many of the cases of children that were taken to the court, and then they would be exposed to some of those rulings or decisions in their migration proceedings. And so all of these are 100% functional for these dolls that can be wearing these wearables. Also, as part of conversation in the magazines, and also part of the possibility of thinking about maybe a doll or a toy that could be used. And this is a resource through which children can actually learn how to dress themselves, but also to interpret what is the text in it. And then acts of wearing. These are practices of children and fashion systems. This is a project that I have been developing in the framework of a PhD project. This research explores how children use garments and how they wear it to be able to resist the norms imposed by supremacy from adults. And so here, next one, please. I'm addressing some of the structures of adult supremacy. When we talk about design of life for children, I try to also talk about a different narrative, making also a possible critique to fashion, where that's also part of my field. And the project starts, this is also a practice, so we are addressing different formats through which we would like to start creating spaces where we can link the resource of what is wearable very broadly, and then have a mechanism or a system that can be multiple, and then everyone is involved, and this can generate conversation for multi-generational audiences. And so to this project, there is another sub-project, which is called Fashion Play Space. And this one is designed to be accessed through public space activations with graphic contents that are also accessible for children. This is a more critique, maybe perspective of how to dress and fashion. Next one, this is a picture of one of the activations that we did in the middle of a sample. Actually, it was in a gallery. This was activating and the project was doing a pop-up, but this is also done in public spaces. This is part of the project as well. These are open dialogue spaces. And the intention is to talk about critical thought and reading of the content that sometimes can perpetuate these ideas of beauty, heteronormity, and also especially when it has to do with fashion that is inserted machiavellically from a very early age, and we are transferring that at home depending on what the children are reading or consuming on the TV. So here we're trying to create some type of critique in terms of the content that many times we have access to. And I wanted to close with a video that I found recently by doing some searches regarding different projects. And I would really like to leave this maybe as, I don't know if maybe as an example, but as a specific act of how this project can be reinterpreted. I mean, one of them, in this case, Article 6, in the universe of today, of 2025, that is 13 years after it was initiated. Everything is political, even when it's political. We have Andrea Cáceres. I am proud of her being my friend. And they had a conversation, and so they provided a lot of examples between fashion and politics. And they were also talking about Peru. And when they provided that example, for me, it was the best thing that I heard. I didn't remember this dress in a very long time, because also what we know, and for those of you that don't know, is that this has printed the Fujimori's general law of health care, and Lucía did this with activism. And because of this law for health, it says for the application of any contraceptive method, previous consent is required from the patient. If we're talking about definitive methods, then the declaration of consent need to be in a written document. And the government of Fujimori actually was very concerned about that. I don't know if you remember this, but in 2024, the Law 32 was enacted. This establishes that criminally it cannot be to investigate some of this. I don't think that this is a coincidence with the date. So this means that all of the governments during the Fujimori and the transition governments, they are outside of any criminal scope. And this is not just for forced sterilization, but also extrajudicial rulings, as well as violations that happened during the internal conflict. So even today, none of the victims can have real justice because of this Congress that is still accepting things that are unacceptable. And that is why, and for many other things, because I do think that nowadays, when we say that the president or the new minister, I mean, I think it actually doesn't make sense. Sometimes it's a meme and it seems that they don't care. Well, I don't know if maybe they have some type of conscience, because we want all the Congress to leave, and that is why we're having a demonstration on the 15th. So we will see you on October 15th at 4 p.m. so that we can make everybody go away. It is a time to get our country back, and always remember that when the people at the bottom move, then the people at the top can fall. And I think I just have one last one. So this is my website, if anybody wants to check it out. I mean, maybe not right now. Thank you very much. I just want to say that what is wearable we should always address it from a critical space. And from that, it can really open dimensions that I think that we don't explore enough, from spaces that are linked mostly to public health and mostly in the context that we are living in today. Thank you. Muchas gracias, Lucía. Eso fue maravilloso. Qué manera tan maravillosa de poder hacer que se escuche tu voz. Tenemos a dos revisores, me parece que
presentations today, and they're going to join us now. I'd like to welcome Itala Schmelz. She's a Mexican artist, curator, and cultural manager and writer. She studied philosophy and natural autonomous at the National Autonomous University of Mexico and has held leadership roles directing major art institutions, including the Public Art Room, the Museum of Art Carrillo, and the Center of the Image. Schmelz is the creator of the Future Closer, the first Mexican science fiction film festival, and served as the curator for the Mexican Pavilion at the 55th Venice Biennale in 2013, presenting the sound work of Cortox and Ariel Guzek. She is also the author of, I'm gonna butcher this, Corteg, I don't know, you're gonna have to say it. Mexican film, science fiction, and has published essays on the visual culture, film, and art in natural international media. She is a doctor in philosophy and teaches at the Esmeralda School of Art. I'm sorry, I had trouble with those words. And our other reviewer is Marcela Chao, Mexican curator, artist, cultural manager, and psychologist whose interdisciplinary practices bridges art, science, and speculative thought. She has a decade of experience curating experimental exhibitions and cultural projects that invite reflection on future imaginations, human adaptations, and the unknown. Chao is a funder and director of Mars Archive. I get it. Oh, cool. A platform dedicated to exploring possible futures through critical, historical, and speculative approaches to space, and has collaborated with institutions such as SOMA, a Center of the Imagination, and programs Art Sensia Technologies, is that at UNAM. Her work emphasizes imaginative encounters that challenge traditional boundaries of art and audience engagement. Thank you both for helping us out with our presentations today.
Thank you. Bueno, voy a empezar yo rápidamente a hacer como aquí el comentario. Creo que, bueno, fue maravilloso. Muchas gracias por todo, por el trabajo que han hecho, y creo que hay como muchas aristas que hay que platicar. Primero, creo que es súper pertinente el tema que estamos hablando en este momento del contexto geopolítico que estamos atravesando, y es un tema que además atraviesa pues siglos de historia, ¿verdad? Que es como, pues, quién decide y quién determina primero qué es la perfección y quién vale la pena y quién no vale la pena, y, o sea, desde dónde se genera esa definición y por qué se perpetúa esa definición, ¿no? Y a través de qué mecanismos se perpetúan estos discursos, que creo que es muy importante, y sobre todo cómo se van desarticulando y luego se vuelven a articular disfrazados, como lo vimos en mesas pasadas, con otro tipo de términos, como por ejemplo el término de transhumanismo, ¿no? Que es uno de los términos que se atraviesan muchísimo en estos discursos ahora de futuro, y cómo ese futuro lo tenemos un poco secuestrado con estas cuestiones que están planteadas desde una perpetuación de derechos que además están fundamentados en un libro, ¿no? Que puede ser la Biblia, o llámenle como quieran, pero es un libro,
I
entonces,
call
que
it, but
dice
it's a
que yo-
book. And so it says that I have a right to, and whoever is not included in these speech, then they don't have rights. And so how some of these narratives can be disarticulated, and maybe we can think from a different space, and mostly not to reproduce them through culture, art, and mostly some of our imaginaries. I think another of the things that is very important to take into consideration is that many times we're not even aware of how we are perpetuating these things. Part of the work that is being generated, or some matters that have to do with our artistic visions, many times they respond to matters that also have to do with financing, for example. So who is going to provide that money? And then the agency, those people that are going to give us money to do that project, how many times we even have to modify the project so that we can be financed or funded. And that takes us to this place where art is not just one thing, right? So art instead is very complex, is very open. And I think that in this part, art responds as well to economic matters that, for example, that are related to visions or scholarships, and that is what makes the art to many times have to fight against these structural mechanisms to really be able to say and narrate and generate some other types of proposals. And so I think that in this case, we saw different things that are complex, like, for example, Judy, this aspect of being able to create that link with children and what we're going through, and how we can narrate this situation in such a way that is not normalized and that is not well seen, that a 5-year-old is being actually taken to another state, putting him away from their family, and for that to be normalized by the geopolitical context that keeps reproducing some of these discourses that clearly we haven't managed to get rid of, despite the many efforts that we have been doing nationally and internationally. And actually, even now, it would seem that what we had advanced after with a lot of effort, which was to have these international treaties and have an international body like the United Nations, now it's losing strength because this group of people is deciding that for them, well, this is not longer a speech that they want to keep following, let's say. And I think that there's something that I think is very important before I give the floor to my colleague here, which is the utopia of one is the dystopia of somebody else. So it's very hard to just say, oh yes, we all have the same ideas and we're going to have the same utopia. But I think that one of the things that we had reached was this matter of being able to generate these dialogues, right? And for me, I think that is actually very well represented in the piece that was shown to us, like the door at the border. So this possibility of being able to create exchanges and have relationships and think about things from a different place. And so instead of these utopian visions, and actually when the planet is demanding for us to mature as a species, because we cannot keep being these brats that only 4 people can just have all of the power, at this specific time where this is demanded from us, what we are doing then, well, not us, clearly, because we are not there, but I mean this group of people that has the power, power, they decide that then what needs to be done is to have their bunkers, and whoever dies, dies, because at the end of the day, since there is not a planet enough for everyone, then it can be enough for a few. For who? For those that are inside this narrative and what is functioning. So I think that what is very interesting and has been very interesting about this encounter and these panels specifically is how we can break these narratives. And mostly, I think that from the art, there is a very important thing, which is how can we avoid perpetuating these discourses from artistic practices, and also to allow artistic practices to not just be at museums, because even museums have starting to have some of these issues of defining what this is for, why is it useful, what is worth keeping, what is not worth keeping. And it could be like I'm not just almost an odontological perspective of who we are, what this is, what are we doing, and how we can generate these relations from what the planet is demanding from us, which is to think about these post-human, who are those that actually have these abilities, and how we can really understand ourselves as inhabitants of this planet, and how we, through this, can generate these relationships with what is not human. And I think that art is one of the most important mechanisms to do that. I do think that, yes, it is true, we can think, archive, or keep things. However, one of the most important things, I think, is to really understand what are the ways in which we are generating this art, where it's coming from, how, and how this can also reach other audiences. Because in many of the panels, they said, well, yes, this is beautiful, and we can talk about that in the academia, and of course we all agree. So how can we reach these other audiences, and we can break these echo chambers that are social media, right? And on top of that, they are created from this algorithm that make us repeat that and only stay in the groups and the circuits that we are already familiar with and that we already know. So that is just my general comment, just very quickly to give the floor to my colleague. Thank you. Well, it is a pleasure for me to be here in this panel. I also managed to hear a little of what happened in the previous days. I think that this has been an encounter regarding a very important topic. It's very peculiar to see how throughout these days we have approached topics from different practices and also from different ways of reflection, right? From very scientific aspects and hard numbers and research that can be anthropologic or academic studies, but at the same time, we have moved a little bit closer to this other aspect of taking into consideration art, or maybe we have gotten closer to knowledge and non-Western cosmovisions. So I think that what has been very interesting is to see how from all of these records we can start creating contributions. And I think in this case, we need to think, what is the particularity of the activations of the artistic production, right? What would be that peculiarity? So from there, first of all, I would like to go a little back in previous panels. It has really called my attention that constantly something has been coming up, and it was not given its actual panel. What we talk about science fiction. It seems that when we are talking about eugenics, one of the resources that are more fruitful is what we can call science fiction, because it's not just talking about whole narratives of science fiction, but also how this is a capability of to fictionate. Because, for example, this open door with a border, etc., that is a way of creating fiction. It's a symbol. It's a symbolization to try to maybe have different types of records. And we could even talk about the power of what's false, and so the capacity of what is creative to be able to talk about these issues. So this activity of science fiction, that takes me to another topic, which has to do with imagination. One way or another, it seems that we are being consumed and totally kidnapped and isolated by this techno-scientific white supremacist that is also very much referred to previously. So here the question has to do with how can we generate resistance mechanisms? How can we create other futures? And so in that sense, I think that non-eugenic future is more utopia and a lost cause, because we live eugenic present, and that is something that we have seen throughout these panels. But in very subtle ways, in very diverse ways. So this is not necessarily from these ideals of white race, because we have already talked about how whiteness goes way beyond skin color, but instead it's from these models of thought and models of future, of progress, of valuing narratives and certain techniques, etc. So what we can observe within this generalized eugenics, which is also something that is in practice, and I think that this generalized eugenics has to do with the fact that the subject of modernity is just the white heteronormated male. That is the subject. The women, indigenous people, we are the others, and that those others are antagonic, right? That they are to be dominated, to be served, to be conquered. And the other aspect that these white suprematician has with also the technology that has actually taken the lead of this modernity project is that one way or another, what it has done is something that was mentioned a lot yesterday, and I think it was very fundamental. When we were talking about AI, we said that AI was parasitic, right? And so AI as parasitic eugenics of our own processes of thought, but mostly of imagination as well. And so we were also talking about imagination as that open space to improvisation, to the other, to what's new, to transformation, right? So in this context of eugenics, where we have stopped being connected to our creative processes and imagination processes, we have mediated our links to others. That has happened technologically. It seems that we cannot generate community because technology is right there. And because we don't have time to create links. And so what happens that here we're talking about also the thought of the outside, and that is what refers to these unconscious processes. Not everything that is operating at a rational, consistent level. Actually, there are a lot of processes that are those that come from an unconscious that is also an unconscious that is collective, and so that is also an order of the imaginary. So all of this is what is being mediated or interrupted by technological processes.
And what for? To homogenize, to homologate all humans, to deactivate them and make them defenseless and make them consumers, perfect consumers, functional, mechanical, functional to the system, that are not problematic, that don't bring non-binarisms or anything that can bring conflict to the system. So we come to this panel and we wonder, what about art? Here's when the interesting thing, it's a space of freedom. I would say art is a space for freedom, for liberty. We were talking about Black poeses. Sergio Villalobos mentioned yesterday this possibility of iterate, alternative improvisation, alternative way of thinking, to create a resistance in the face of systems. So here's where the creative possibilities of art occur to renovate or renew, sorry, the imaginaries. When we're talking about how to regenerate community, art to this day has nothing to do with studies or lonely studies of art. It has to do with creating initiatives, projects to create community that can bring together people. We can see a number of cases here. Art with a power and a healing capability, as in the first example. Yes, maybe art a little bit naive, maybe not the big art, but it's a healing art, a community art, as a form of community exercise to which we can all have access. After this project, and without doing, if we conduct this kind of art without making human links, but also an alternative network, more like a micellar network, not the web, the World Wide Web that regulates, or the net that keeps knowledge behind a wall. I think it will be like more a micellar, more rhizomatic, a network that can transform itself, that can go to places. Sergio Villalobos also mentioned this terrestrial community. How can we conduct, or how can we create an alternative terrestrial community, alternate to the capital? And Rosanna talked about how to find lights in the midst of this dominion, of this radical dominion of the world, that it's on this in the midst of in the middle of an apocalypse. They were talking about butterflies. What are the butterflies? Like making reference to Uberman, sorry, as a reference to Agamben, and that was a micro power. Art is a way of micro power. The very moment I exercise these different practices, that I wear these clothes, I am doing a micro power exercise, and therefore a resistance to the norms, a resistance to the necro machine, which is another way it's called. I think that we live a circumstance where this systemic power is no, we are not able to face it directly, but for many reasons, because I think this is what happens during the Soviet Revolution. We abolished a system, but in the end, we keep the same visions in the face of progress. So nothing changed. I take the power to some, and then I hand that power to other people that replicate the same practices. So how do we keep heterogeneity, diversity? How can we transform? How can we move this world structure so that we can have a conviviality in differences, to bring together heterogeneity instead of just installing another model of truth? So each of the projects that were presented today was put into practice, seeking a way of creating from playfulness, from humor, because these practices are not coerced. I think that what improv is not fixed, it's not there sustained, because when you look for it on a specific place, it's no longer there, it's constantly moving. So we have to be a little bit like that. Our humor, or it has to be one of the practices that needs to remain active. Quite impressive that after many years that you made this this dress, it took 10 years to the society of, I don't know, critical sense, to wear such a dress, which is, by the way, a very interesting project, as all of your projects. And I was wondering if in your project, wouldn't you be missing a criticism to fast fashion and pollution? If this dimension, because yeah, we all are wearing T-shirts with the brands, big brands, and that's what art can do. Instead of saying of making a T-shirt of Adidas, maybe saying no future, or I don't know, future is not, it's binary, or I don't know, something like that. I think that you are using clothes or this bodily means to wear a dissidence, like making dissidence wearable. I believe it's quite interesting. Although it's also true that clothing has become one of the things that go against ecosystems. So I don't know, maybe an integration, maybe using different kinds of clothes. I mean, I don't know. I'm just iterating because I was wondering. It's amazing all this clothing, but clothing at some point or from certain perspective is part of the problem. You know, the excess of clothing because of the industry. So well, I just leave my participation here.
I think we have time for questions, do we? No? Who's the... Oh, okay, okay. Does anybody have a question or an energy after that for the question? Yes.
Sí, muchísimas gracias por tremendo panel. Solamente quiero leer un comentario que le acabo de mandar a Richard, pero está en nuestro canal de YouTube de una querida colega y ex estudiante de 17, artista y curadora, que dice un comentario para Richard, agradeciendo inmensamente el compartir de su obra, especialmente Stories of My Back, con la intención de compartir desde mi experiencia. Vivo con la espalda rota. Gracias por recuperar tu espalda y las de tantos, compartiendo desde mi investigación. En un libro publicado por 17, encontré que en Egipto se solía nombrar al extranjero como alguien sin espalda. Hoy te doy las gracias por no solo ayudar a recoger nuestras espaldas y envolverlas entre hojas de maíz, reforzando mi propuesta al decir que dar la espalda no es ignorar ni rendirse. Dar nuestras espaldas a los otros es mostrarnos en reconocimiento de nuestra absoluta vulnerabilidad, con la certeza de que hacerlo inspirará el encuentro con otras espaldas negadas. Esa es Marcela Quiroz.
Yeah, thank you for
Thank
the
you for
panel.
that comment.
One of the observations I wanted to make is the power of some of the work was tied to this notion that it's not really time-bound and that the concepts evolved over time. And I think that's important to think about as we consider our work. But thinking about your projects, I'm curious for you if you could articulate this notion between art as a relationship between curation, invitation, and provocation, because I see those pieces sort of invite all of those different kind of interactions. I was curious about your thoughts on that.
No? I don't know. I was just thinking when the reviewers were talking, I wear almost daily a shirt that says "Warrior Up" because I'm like sick of it. But I don't know. I guess to me, what is important is education, and any way we can get it across, we have to. We have to start younger than what we're doing now. We can't just start with all this stuff in college. We've got to start younger. A lot of my work is about decolonizing, deconstructing. Christopher Columbus did not discover America, he invaded it. And a lot of other things like that. And so I think the way to do that is art. I have a project that I do with middle school kids in making baskets. And if they're an English as a second language middle school student and they don't have math concepts, they can't take the higher level math in high school, go to college. So I teach them the math concepts they need with basketry. And then they're allowed. And so I just think education will answer. The more educators we get that can pass along this information, the better we'll be.
I agree. I also think that we generally remove, I think in Spanish you say el ciudadano de a pie. I don't know, I always try to translate that to English, but I guess your average citizen, as someone who has no notion on aesthetics. I mean, my perspective generally comes from aesthetics around wearables and the perception that people lack of knowledge around wearing our fashion when we all wear clothes, right? So we can start there. So I think when it comes to, at least in my experience, when I'm designing, whether I'm designing an experience, a project, or an object, I am thinking intentionally in, now more than before for sure, in the multiple dimensions in which this object could be approached and interpreted. And I, especially with Artículo 6, it let me really think about who was allowed to wear these pieces and who wasn't. Who was allowed to interpret this or not, because I received multiple feedback around this. I remember once this Peruvian stylist, a fashion stylist, and when we say the word fashion, we come into a very problematic space, right? When we're also thinking that the wearable is not critical enough, because we've learned only one way of thinking about fashion as a system, and I argue against that. There are multiple ones. So yeah, not all projects might deal with the same realities around the multiple disciplines. That being said, I'm thinking about an object that I might be able to design in a particular series of ways, but now I know that once it's out in the world, I want it to have a life on its own, and that I might not be able to control that. And I don't get to pick who gets or not to be critical about my object, or whether they like it aesthetically or not. Like, I get to produce some activations, the ones that I generally document. If I receive funding generally from academia to produce a lot of these projects, with the privilege to access even to those funds, like I can get to produce some of those experiences up to a certain point. But on the other end, and more on the pedagogical, I guess, end of things, I also want this to be interpreted from the experience of who is approaching that. And then curating, that happens since a very early age, becomes a form that is not restricted by a parameter of beauty and aesthetics and the ways of how we should be. Anyway, I don't know if that kind of answers something, but at least I like to think that a lot of what it's designed and created can play in these multiple formats, so that more folks can relate to that in different ways. And going back, sorry, I forgot, so sorry. Going back to the Peruvian stylist who wore these pieces, I got a lot of questions from close friends saying, like, why would you allow them to wear that? Like, they're not critical at all. And for that particular project, we generally, when a person wants to activate this, there will be a conversation of the project, where the project stands in terms of Peruvian politics, sexual and reproductive health, etc. But the way in which people are interpreting that are also in terms of aesthetics and styling and fashion, which is not necessarily thought as this place of critical thinking. But now when you go to then read the story of this particular person who wore these pieces, and the fact that they ended up creating a chain of effect in their own community around the case of forced sterilizations that no one in that community had heard about. So, and in the same way, then 12 years later, you know, the pieces appear, and it ends up having a different way of being interpreted in those spaces too. Now, are those valid or not? Maybe they're far away from where the project started, but or not. Those are opportunities for the political, aesthetically, material-based design object to exist in so many multiple forms. Yes.
Just wrap it up.
Okay. Thank you for listening, for commenting, and please, I cannot say enough about researching, investigating, understanding the untold story, and that there's hidden meanings in what we have to say sometimes. Thank you.
So I want to thank the panel, and I'd like to thank the respondents who very kindly accepted to participate with us. We are a bit short on time. We need to begin at 3:30 sharp so as to not jumble up our afternoon sessions. And the other thing, I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that our book fair has opened, and I very enthusiastically want you to visit it and get to know it a bit. It's just here. So perhaps during the break this afternoon, you can take a look. So have a good lunch and see you here at 3:30. Thank you.